warmly welcome everybody. I'm Cinnamon Dornside. I'm the Executive Director of the Foreign Policy Institute at SAIS, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you today as we delve into Qatar's evolving role as a mediator in the complex landscape that is our Middle East. The significance of today's discussion resonates all the more deeply as the Middle East navigates a tumultuous period marked by escalating tensions and persistent conflicts. In this increasingly perilous landscape, Qatar stands prominently engaged in the collective efforts towards stability. It is against this backdrop that we are honored to welcome Dr. Majed Al-Ansari, advisor to the Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the official spokesperson to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar, to share his insights on this crucial topic. Guiding our discussion today will be the highly accomplished Hafed Al-Ghwell, who is a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute, and Hafed's profound knowledge of the region and his insightful analyses have graced numerous FPI events, and his expertise in navigating the complex geopolitical landscape makes him the ideal moderator for this nuanced conversation. As we embark on today's intellectual journey, exploring Qatar's diplomatic prowess, let us do so with an awareness of the FPI's own rich history and ongoing endeavors. Together, we bear witness to a legacy dedicated to addressing the complexities and challenges of international affairs, reinforcing the FPI's role in shaping the future of global diplomacy and our mission to advance practically oriented research and discussions about foreign policy. We seek practical answers to real-world problems, and I think that our discussion today is going to be an illustration of that. Over the years, we've hosted influential forums like the Washington Roundtables, bringing together policymakers, scholars, and practitioners to address critical global issues. Our dedication to the Middle East extends beyond forums, and initiatives like the Center for Transatlantic Relations, fostering critical dialogue and cooperation between the United States and Europe on regional issues, and the Middle East program, offering dedicated platforms for research and analysis. FPI's unwavering commitment to advancing knowledge and addressing the complexity of international affairs, including the evolving role of Qatar in the Middle East, reinforces our indispensable role in the shaping of future diplomacy and global relations. Without further ado, let us commence this scholarly exploration. And I now hand this over to Senior Fellow Hafed Al-Ghwell for his welcome remarks and the introduction of our distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Majed Al-Ansari. We anticipate a dialogue that will significantly contribute to our understanding of regional dynamics and Qatar's potential contribution towards fostering peace and stability. Thank you for being part of this important dialogue.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We have also some audience online, which expands our audience reach. This is an important event, I think, especially during this time where Qatar has been playing a pivotal role in mediating some of the most difficult conflicts in the region. Qatar has carved a position for itself in international relations, despite its small size. It is now the go-to mediator for very complex issues. Afghanistan, the role that Qatar played in bringing a resolution in Afghanistan and direct negotiation between the United States government and even the Taliban, which is something that we never thought can be possible 20 years ago. Qatar also mediated conflicts in Chad, and now you see the name of Qatar and news on Hamas and Israel conflict. Has been very successful in releasing 100 hostages so far, with negotiation continuing, where we hope that the rest of the hostages and war will stop soon. So it's, my joke is, one time I met the foreign minister, His Excellency, and I told him that pretty soon everybody who has a problem with his wife is going to call you to mediate. So anyway, so we are honored to have the chief spokesperson for Qatar, a man of distinction, long history, long career. He's also serves as the advisor to the prime minister. He's very much involved in all of these issues that Qatar is taking on. Dr. Majed Al-Ansari, it's really an honor to have you here. Thank you. I'm glad that our students will have a chance to discuss these issues with you directly and understand the position of Qatar in this complex region. So the program is very simple. We're gonna give the floor to Dr. Ansari to speak for a few minutes, and then I'll have a small dialogue with him about some of the issues that come up in his presentation or in his talk, and then we'll open it for Q&A. So we'll try to really keep to the schedule. He only has an hour with us, and we'll try to get as many questions as possible. Keep in mind, there are some people also watching us online, and they will be sending their questions to my colleague Lana, and then we'll take few from their side and few from your side. Please, Dr. Majed.
Thank you very much, Professor. Let me, on behalf of my government, decline any mediation attempt of any kind of marital disputes you might have. I'm very happy to be here today. As Dr. Hafed stated, I come from academia, and it's always good to be back speaking in front of fellow academics and students, because this is where I feel most comfortable and where I feel at home. And although I am now forced to represent my government in speaking, I also like to think of myself as an intellectual who has his own thoughts. And as we are speaking, in this format, I would like to mix the two, and apologize if that happens sometimes, speaking as an intellectual and speaking as a spokesperson for my government. I'd like just to begin for a few minutes, if you allow me, Dr. Hafed, with explaining the context of Qatari mediation. Because obviously and understandably, the question of why the hell is Qatar involved in every conflict in the world, the small, annoying little country that keeps popping up whenever there's a conflict around the world. So I just, would like to give you some color over where this started. In the middle of the 1990s, we were facing an existential threat in Qatar regionally. And there was a question of how to maintain our national security. And the answer to that is threefold. The then decision makers decided on these three things. One is we needed an economic model that would support and sustain the prosperity of our people. And this is why we opted to explore LNG, and we became one of the biggest producers internationally of LNG. Two is we needed international alliances that would help protect us against the instability in the region. And this is why we decided to hedge strategically with the United States and ally ourselves with the United States in the multifaceted relationship. And three, we needed to be relevant in the international community. We're too small to be noticed. The population of Qatar now is 3 million. Those of them who are Qatari are 340,000. So probably 20 block radius in Europe, for example, right? Or even less than that. So how do you make a country, a state, a member of the international community, with that small population, that small size, relevant in the international community? You become a peace facilitator. How do you succeed as a peace facilitator? You do things that others won't. And that meant talking to the people in the doghouse, in the international community's doghouse. That meant paying a dividend into peace facilitation, and not only just sending you mediators idly. And that meant taking high risk, high gain, initiative when it comes to mediation. In 2006, we were visited at the time by Condemnation, and if you remember, of course, what happened in 2006, that there was an election, Palestinian territories, and Hamas won those elections, and the United States, amongst others, and the international community decided to disengage with the Palestinian Authority. Then Hamas controlled Palestinian Authority. At this moment, the United States reached out to Qatar and said, listen, can you help open a channel of communication with Qatar? I was at the time a low-level employee in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I remember the discussions at the time were, this will be very difficult in the future if we decide to do that. But the next question was, who else would do their job in the region? And the answer was that nobody else would touch this with a 10-foot pole. And therefore, we decided to take on the mantle of mediation between both sides. Countless mediations took place since then. In 2012, we were faced with a predicament when Hamas decided to, there was a fallout between Hamas and Iran over the situation in Syria, and they decided to leave Damascus, and they had one choice, one place where they can go to, which was Tehran. And we all knew that if the Hamas leadership moved to Tehran, we would lose that channel of communication, and then you would have to go through the Iranians if you wanted to mediate with Hamas, and in coordination with the Israelis and the Americans, we decided to host a political office in Qatar. The last mediation before the 7th of October was on the 28th of September. In the last 2 years, the level of escalation in the Palestinian territories became unbelievable. We had to mediate literally every other week. And we knew that an explosion was coming to the situation. Obviously, nobody could have anticipated what happened, terrible events on the 7th of October, but there was a lot of leading up to that. And we are now, of course, involved in the mediation, and I'll have to discuss that with you, Hafed, and with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for this. I mean, I'm glad you touched on what was the thinking behind the context of where Qatar decided to take on this approach. And in some of these very, as you said, high risk, high reward complex. Let me I have a couple of comments and then we'll open it up. His Excellency, the Prime Minister, a couple of days ago, spoke about the meetings in Paris last weekend. And he was extremely optimistic that this might lead seriously into a longer term ceasefire. And that it will lead into a political process to solve this problem on a longer term basis, instead of this, every couple of years we've got an attack, we have to mediate it. Do you have any sense, or can you share with us publicly what is the plans for this in the future?
As you rightly mentioned, the meeting in Paris succeeded in consolidating the proposals on the table into one proposal. That proposal has been approved by the Israeli side, and now we have an initial positive confirmation from the Hamas side also over the general framework. It will represent a general understanding over how the next pause or the coming humanitarian pause would look like. It does not include a lot of the details that still need to be discussed, but we are optimistic that we are now at a point where it has eluded us for about 2 months now to get to a point where both sides agree on the principles of how the pause is going to look like. There's still a very tough road in front of us, but we are optimistic because both sides now have agreed to the premise that would lead to a next pause. We're hopeful that in the next couple of weeks, we'd be able to share good news about that. But as I said, it's a fluid situation, very complicated, but we remain hopeful.
That's welcome news. I hope it happens very quickly to eliminate any more bloodshed. One last question, and I'll jump in during the discussion. But there are a number of very critical conflicts in the region, and in my perspective, many of them share the ground of the problem. I mean, many of them, like Sudan, like Libya, are very serious conflicts. They're still ongoing. I know that Qatar has really a serious interest in both countries, not necessarily any economic or political interest, but humanitarian interest, and because of the long history, the shared culture and all of that. Do you see in the future any chance for these conflicts like Sudan and Libya to be taken up by Qatar?
You know, one of the saddest realities of our region that the number of stable states in the region are in the minority, as opposed to failed states and failing states. And every year we get an addition or two to the list of those states facing such challenges. Situation in Libya, situation in Egypt, in Yemen, in Lebanon, all around the region, to be honest, is indicative of an imminent collapse. What is happening in Africa, in the Sahel, and in the Horn is very alarming, and all of that has a bearing on international security, but obviously on the Middle East. We have been supporting the mediation undertaken by our partners in Saudi Arabia and the United States over Sudan. We have been heavily engaged in Libya with the UN process over there, and we are hopeful to see results coming up. But obviously, I mean, I don't want to be the pessimist in the room, which usually I end up being. But the situation overall in the region is being diluted because of the current war. The efforts, the energy, the resources being put into conflicts in Libya, in Sudan, in Lebanon are being diminished by the need to focus on the situation in Gaza. So it's even for these contexts that we need to push harder to the end of war. We are working on mediations, or in other locations like between Venezuela and the United States, between still with our engagement in Afghanistan, and of course the ongoing deal between Iran and the United States, and the reunification of Ukrainian children with their families. All of this is happening at the same time, and it's just testimony to the situation we're living in the world today.
Yes, I mean, my concern is because I'm paying a lot of attention to the growing power of non-state actors, and they seem to be multiplying every day. And in the region, when you have the states that are really weak, and the emergence of these non-state actors, whether ideological based or even criminal organizations, that became even stronger than the state. If nothing happens, it's going to be a very sad future indeed. And plus, I'm also pessimistic most of the time, and I always say that a pessimist is basically a more experienced optimist. So it's a matter of experience. Any questions from the audience here, please? Yes, please. Let's start with our distinguished professor, Dan, who also was with me in Qatar about less than a year ago. So please, Dan.
Daniel Serwer, I'm a professor here at SAIS, senior fellow. Daniel Serwer, professor and senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute. You've emphasized right from the first that in order to play this role, you have to do things no one else will touch. And one of those things is more extreme versions of political Islam. Could you elucidate for us? Qatar is often accused of supporting political Islam. Could you elucidate in some detail your attitude towards different versions of it and how you view it overall?
Thank you. As you rightly mentioned, Professor, we have been accused of that for a really long time. It has been used in narrative against my country for years and years in various instances. As I said in the beginning, when you are mediating, you're not mediating with your friends, you're mediating between enemies. Right? And the reality of the world since 2001 is that in many of the conflicts, we are faced with at least one side being either a terrorist group linked to Islamist ideology or a political Islamist. I think one of the main reasons why Qatar has been branded like that was the attitude towards the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring was Now, when we talk about, we don't talk about it as a time of hope, we talk about it as a time of despair. But at the time, it was a moment for hope in the region. The region faced so many challenges up to the Arab Spring, and one of the main challenges was the challenge of governance. Qatar is not a democratic country. We have our form of participatory politics. We have an elected legislature. And we haven't been pushing for democratization of the Arab world and changing the political system, but we were seeing the dangers of oppression. We were seeing the dangers of a decaying state under the weight of oppression in the Arab world. When the Arab Spring demonstrations erupted, there were two main ways of thinking of it. Either protecting the stability of the state or hoping for positive change. The leadership of Qatar opted for the latter and was supportive of the popular uprising, supportive of the regime that came out of it. And we were hoping that this would be the moment for the Arab world when it moves from being, in the situation that it is, the hub for international conflict, to being a hub for prosperity and a role model for the world. Sadly, the results of the Arab Springs were not as we were anticipating. And we have learned a lot from these lessons. During the process, obviously, a lot of the popular uprisings were either led or in part had participation from political Islam groups who are amongst the most popular, especially at the time. We have worked with them as we have worked with others. We have supported governments coming out in the post the Arab Spring uprisings, some of which were majority Islamist groups. Some of them were not. We have supported liberal groups, we have supported Islamist groups and other groups. And I think a lot of the demonization of Qatar was an attempt to move the needle of the discussion from that Qatar supported the popular uprising to Qatar supported political Islam. But when we look at the reality of the situation, our relationship with the Taliban was mandated by the United States. Our relationship with Hamas was mandated by the United States. So is the United States a supporter of political Islamism? Especially, I don't think so. But it is the reality that you need somebody to talk to these groups. You need the channel of communication. You need a trustworthy mediator that is able to navigate with these groups. You cannot do that when you are isolating, disengaging, not doing anything to be able to reach these groups and talk to them. You have to engage. And while a country like the United States would not be able to do that, a country like Qatar has taken upon itself that risk. And we know that that risk brings in all of this narrative against our country, but we also believe in what we do and believe in the results we were able to reach because of this engagement. We were able to help put an end to the longest war in US history through our engagement with the Taliban. We were able to avert the war we are seeing right now in Gaza so many times in the past couple of years or even decade or so. And we will continue to do this because, again, if we don't do this, we don't see anybody else doing it.
Yes, please. There should be another mic.
Thank you so much for speaking. Thank you so much for speaking. This has been a fascinating conversation so far. My name is Josh. I'm a master's student here at SAIS. So when you're discussing that Qatar has become a mediator for the region largely because it chose to have the conversations that others aren't willing to, as the saying goes, the enemy also has a vote. What does it take to become an accepted mediator by actors like Hamas with a office in a country that also hosts US military bases? How do you gain that trust? How do you convince the other parties that you're working with that when Hamas tells you something that they'll follow through? How do you convince Hamas of the same? Walk us through that a little bit.
So every mediation you begin with is a different story, right? It's a different case study, but you learn as you go along. And we started this in the mid-90s, and we've had a lot of good choices and bad choices, and we've had successes and failures. And if I don't want to sound like we have a developed model of mediation, but I can share with you what I think, at least personally, what makes these mediations successful and the ability to penetrate when you are talking to these groups. One main thing is the ability to show not neutrality in the mediation process, but sincerity. Because you can never be completely neutral in any mediation you are doing, especially when you are doing it with terrorist groups, you're doing it with radical groups, you're doing it with those who you don't agree with, right? I mean, it's very obvious that we don't agree with the Israeli government over their policies over the Palestinians, and certainly we don't agree with Hamas over the actions 7th of October and their militant actions altogether. But you have to be sincere in the mediation process. You have to go to both sides and say, we have your best interest at heart, because this is the only way for us to succeed. And then, after you've established that fact, that principle, you need to show that sincerity on the table by conveying the messages the right way and developing the ideas with them, not only being a messenger. A mediator who is a messenger can have 10 to 20% chance of succeeding. But if you are there developing the ideas with them, reaching the results with them, then it's a different story. And then you have to put your money where your mouth is. If you are going to say, listen, my only job here is for you guys to sign an agreement, I get a photo op, I'm successful, thank you very much, everybody goes back home. Usually that ends with a very short agreement, unless both sides really want to end the conflict, right? But you need to go, you need to support, you need to continue. Peace facilitation is not only mediation. Mediation is the first step to peace facilitation. And if the parties know that you are willing to do that, like for example, when we mediated for the agreement, the Doha agreement in Lebanon, in a previous iteration of the Lebanese crisis, we pledged to help in the development of South Lebanon. And that brought about the agreement. When we got the Doha agreement for the Darfur, between the separatists in Darfur and the central government in Khartoum, we pledged to pay into the development of Darfur. That kind of added value as a mediator also gives you leverage over both parties. It also happened between Hamas and Israel, where we pledged to participate in the reconstruction efforts in Gaza beforehand in the 2000s, in order to be able to say to both sides, to the Israelis, listen, we are fitting the bill that you should be fitting in Gaza, and to say to the Palestinians, listen, we are helping you maintain your people. This is very useful in being a mediator. But again, it's you learn by your mistakes. There's no golden rule for mediation. Every process you go into, you learn as you go along.
Share this. Thank you. I mean, this is where the academic came out, sharing with us his experience and what works, what doesn't. Okay, we have three. Let me start with Hind, please. By the way, those who are following us online, please send your questions to the email for the Foreign Policy Institute that is on the page, and we will take those questions. I understand, and let me welcome virtually that Congressman Byrd is also joining us online, and we'd love to hear from him and his thoughts on this. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Hafed. I'm Hind Al-Ansari. I'm a fellow in DC, and I'm also a Qatari citizen. My question for you, Dr. Majed, considering the growing anger and frustration in the Arab street over Western governments' unconditional support for the settler colonial entity, as well as the inaction by Arab leaders, how is Qatar managing its role without sacrificing the unwavering support for the Palestinian cause in the Arab streets?
Thank you. So you're throwing me under the bus with that question, but
Takes a Qatari to do that.
The main issue here is that we are all facing a radicalization of a generation. The images coming out of Gaza, the images that came out of 7th of October, are radicalizing a generation not in the Middle East, not in the Muslim world, but in the world altogether. because it justifies violence. Violence justifies violence. When you see, you know, I was watching a video the other day, and there is this family trying to leave a hospital in Gaza, and it's led by a matriarch, a grandmother who's holding a 4-year-old, probably grandchild, very near to her, and she's waving very empathically a white flag, and she's shot in the head, and she falls to the ground, and the child starts running because there's a 4-year-old child, but he understands what the gunshot means. As he's running away, he stops for a second. He looks back at his grandmother, probably for like 2 seconds. And then he runs away again. There is a generation with these experiences, you know, drawn into their psyches and deciding how they are going to behave in the future, regardless of the context around them, because this is the only image that will stay with them. And this is happening in all sides. You know, children here in the US are seeing, you know, these videos and on social media. It's not limited to one locale or the other. So the situation, this radicalization of the generation is very, very, very dangerous for all of us. You will end up with not only one militant group, you'll end up with a generation that is ready to choose violence unless we find a way for peace. And the problem is that the political decisions and the political operators that make these decisions in the conflict are making it based on short-term goals, political posturing, without any recognition of the strategic risks that we are facing. These are real risks. We saw them in September 11th. Because if you go to the years leading up to September 11th, there was a justification of violence. Hatred towards the West, hatred towards occupation, designed the ecosystem that a group like Al-Qaeda can thrive in. And today, do you think not that the current situation is being used as a rally call by all of these groups internationally to bring in more people into their thinking? Of course it is. And we will see that only expedited in the future. So we need, collectively, we need to show our peoples, especially those who are in government, that we are doing all that we can to stop this, and that we are willing to voice not only our concern, but our actions towards ending this. The situation is not positive by any means, and will not be positive. We can't draw a very nice picture of the future we are going to face right now. But these are challenges we need to acknowledge now, and we need to start working towards ending them.
Thank you for that. It is, even in my own following of this, the level of violence and the call for violence and hate throughout the region, not only in the Arab region, but that includes even the Islamic world, Africa, elsewhere, is really increasing at alarming levels. That is also fueled, unfortunately, by the international communities and our government here in Washington refusal to stop the war, which basically risks serious discreditation of the United States that sponsor the international order, peace and security around the world, humanitarian law, and all of that. And we have sincerely used that against the Russians, for example, in the Ukraine. But the rest of the world sees us as a failure or failing to do the same when it comes to this conflict. That undermines not only peace in the short term, but undermines the very foundation of the international order. I think now it will be extremely hard for anybody to defend the United States if I'm in a university in Cairo or Lebanon, it'd be practically impossible to defend the US on these grounds. So I'm glad you touched on also the risk of increased violence, which is not going to end and it's going to just escalate. Sir, I saw you raising your hand, am I correct?
Two simple questions. I am from Johns Hopkins, Lopez from Johns Hopkins. what are two specific connections that you will try to find between Islam and Zionism that are against violence that you will use to make your mediation? That's one question. And the second question, are you going to try to get the international community in order to work for or are you planning to aim to that difficult goal? Two states there. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Gonna charge you soon.
So, first of all, Professor, I think all ideologies can be used, as you know better than me, for both narratives. You can use texts to justify violence, and you can use text to push for peace. And I think the important thing is that the rational thinkers within both camps utilize the text, utilize the ideology, utilize the ideas in a way that would promote peace. And this is the problem that has eluded, I think, religious scholars all through history, which is finding a resonant message that cannot be overturned when the political tie is there. And so I apologize if I can't tell you here where I can find that common message, although it is apparent in both ideologies. But it is for sure our rational thought is what's going to bring it about. And obviously there is time for fighting and there is time for peace, but we need to think of our ideologies and think exactly how we can utilize them for peace. Since 2002, the Arab Peace Initiative was put on the table. The Arab Peace Initiative said a Palestinian state on 1967 borders, living side by side with an Israeli state, normalizing relations between the Arabs and Israel, and ending a conflict that has been there for 7 decades. Obviously, nothing on the ground now or in the past couple of years gives any hope that we can reach a two-state solution in the short term. But the main problem of the past couple of years is that we decided collectively to sideline the Palestinian issue. There are those in the region and beyond that thought you can basically mute the Palestinian issue and it will disappear. And the Israelis can live in peace, and the region can look beyond this issue, and that's it. And we were warning from day one that this policy will only lead to more violence in the region. The most dangerous thing that can happen to any context around the world is hopelessness, despair. Any people that end up in absolute despair, you cannot predict what they will do, and there is no incentive for them to live on. And therefore, you'll end up with violence, you'll end up with hatred, you'll end up with radicals, and you'll end up with war. And this is what we have right now. I remember in March of last year, in Ramadan, we were meeting with our counterparts and our interlocutors in the US, in the UK, and other countries, and pleading with them that something will happen in the Palestinian territories. And we were anticipating that war will break out in Ramadan, so March of last year. And we went through countless mediations, and we used all the venues we had, and we talked to all of our partners, and all of our partners did all they could in order to avert war. But the situation was unsustainable. The human suffering in Gaza, the policies enacted on the Palestinians on the West Bank, and we were all hostages to policies that everybody knew, all who are working in the field knew that would lead to more violence. But sadly, we couldn't do anything until we have a situation we have right now.
I agree more. I mean, I think the world tends to sort of ignore the obvious. I mean, even if you're here in any neighborhood where you have despair, it doesn't take a brain to know what will come next. The fact that we've been ignoring that conflict is just our own fault. It is the failure of the international community to actually address this. And there is no way, I can tell you both as an Arab American, as a person who's been reading this, following it, there is no way at all that the region, the Arab region or the Middle East or whatever you want to call it, is going to stabilize without solving the Palestinian issue. It's just zero chance for that. I saw somebody here. Okay. Yes, let's start with you, and then I'll come to you over there. I promise, okay?
Noura Megda, another Qatari here at John Hopkins. I'm a
You're
US.
Qatari.
Yep, definitely. By next year, hopefully, we will conquer DC.
Inshallah. We've been trying to recruit Qataris.
I'm a US government and foreign policy student. I specialize in foreign entities lobbying. And here comes my question. According to the Foreign Agents Registration Act databases, Qatar has spent since 2015 around $2,400 million. And of course, that has dramatically increased since the end of the blockade on the state of Qatar. However, as we see more senators and House representatives opposing the ceasefire agreement, will we see an increase in the Qatari lobbying efforts? And in order to succeed in the mediation and to bring a ceasefire to the table. And I'm not talking about corruption or bribery. I'm talking about legal lobbying efforts.
But thank you. You see, of course, how
mashallah.
challenge I'm facing here is with my
We have two distinguished ladies here from Qatar.
Obviously, I'll talk a little bit about a strategy choice that I think was developed throughout the 2017 and beyond. We have been in all the regional and international initiatives we've been working on for decades, focusing on the actual act itself and leaving for lack of a better word, the marketing of what we do to the actualities on the ground. So basically the deals talk about themselves. You don't need to do a lot of it. But when we started seeing orchestrated campaigns against Allah that would hamper our efforts, would impede the mediations we were working on, we saw the need, again, to pay a dividend into making these mediations succeed. There is engagement, and I think that's the most important, is the institutional engagement, which Qatar has with its interlocutors around the world. We've always been keen on not playing into the personal politics of other countries, not being part of the political posturing cycle within these countries, because this is a very dangerous game today. Right? You hedge with people, then you end up paying the price for when these people leave or do something wrong. So you end up, if you're hedging your interests with a political operator here in DC, if that political operator does something wrong, loses elections, has a scandal of his own, then you link to that directly. You hedge with institutions, then that is a sustainable. And we learned in 2017 that strategy was correct. So, with the beginning of the Trump administration, we were facing so many challenges with engaging with the administration, but at the end, it was the US Army, CIA, the State Department that worked collectively and convinced the White House to reverse the policy. And we have seen that with the Republican administrations, with the Democratic administrations. Political posturing happens throughout the election. There's the Republican White House that is dealing very keenly with us. You see critics from the Democratic Party. It's the nature of democracy, right? It's the nature of democratic. We get entangled into that. But hedging with institutions is always safer choice. Now, lobbying, this is the capital of lobbying in the world, right? You have more lobbyists than you have speed bumps.
A very Syrian American official told me once, without lobbying, American democracy won't be around. It will fail. So it's an essential part of Washington.
Yeah, so obviously you have to be part of that. Obviously we have our lobbying methods. People from the embassy presented here have been doing that for a really long time, and you do that in every country you go to. You lobby for your own interest. We pride ourselves in lobbying above board, most of our lobbying efforts are known to all those who seek information about it, and we very openly talk about it and talk about what we do. And our engagement here, I mean, the Prime Minister spent 3 days in DC, and he's now in New York engaging with think tanks, engaging with academics, engaging with legislators, engaging with interlocutors from the administration in order to secure an understanding of what Qatar is doing and to combat the orchestrated campaigns against our efforts. I won't comment on the amounts and how much we pay and that kind of thing. You know, this is left to the lawyers and
It's public knowledge.
exactly the public knowledge you can get to. But I hope, because personally I always believe that there's a cost-benefit analysis. I think a lot of state actors that don't understand the DC environment think if you throw more money at it, that will simply help your cause. That's not always the case. You can throw a lot of money, but if the original product is bad, nobody's gonna buy it, right? You can market however you want, but if it doesn't taste good, people will not eat it.
My boss in the World Bank used to repeat that. You know, there is lobbying and there is trying to explain your position, right? And I think there is a confusion. Some causes, they just need somebody articulate to explain them to people. People are smart enough. The lobbying part, that can be problematic sometimes. Yes, the two of you over there, and then any questions from online? And yes, any questions from online, Nada? Okay, so please go ahead.
Thank you. My name's Elizabeth McBride. I'm a master's student here at SAIS as well. Thank you for speaking with us. I'm going to be in your country in a couple of weeks for Web Summit, actually. So I have a focus on innovation and entrepreneurship, which gives me perhaps an optimistic bent that underlies my next question. And that is, who should oversee the rebuilding of the Gaza Strip?
Why don't we take the two questions together, so this way we don't waste time.
Hello, hi, my name is Jefferson. I work for the Afghanistan Assumptions Project. It's up at Tufts University. My question is, as Qatar started developing its mediator role, did it look at any other countries and other cases to develop capacity? And then right now, as Qatar has shown such leadership, are other nations across the world looking to Qatar? And what other nations do you think could also play such a role in the future so that we can have multiple successful mediators across the world?
One of the problems of the past experiences and reconstruction in Gaza is that everybody was engaged in it knowing it was not sustainable. So we were feeding the beast. And I think everybody now is in agreement that we need a sustainable model before we go into reconstruction. The sustainable model has to start with a unified Palestinian government that can oversee reconstruction, oversee aid delivery, oversee the return of Palestinians to their areas, and also oversee the security situation in the West Bank and Gaza. Unless we have that, then efforts at reconstruction would be in vain. You know, we all saw the videos of hospitals being bombed into the ground, universities being torn into rubble. All of that was investment put in by aid agencies, by international donors, by countries like Qatar, that ends up just in the same cycle of every time there's a war, it's bombed and you have to do it again. So the first thing we need is we need a governance model accepted by the international community, representative of the Palestinian people, and able, which is a tall order, I understand, but I think we need to put that as a prerequisite to the reconstruction effort. When we reach that, I think we need an international collective effort. Not only because we need everybody to participate and pay into it, but because we need an international buy-in, right? Also, one of the mistakes in the past was for 1, 2, 3 countries to participate in the reconstruction, others feeling we don't own this, right? There needs to be an international owning of the reconstruction effort in Gaza, which also would make it more difficult to reverse that in the future. I mean, I wasn't in government when they started the mediation efforts in Qatar in the mid-90s. I was still in school trying to figure my way around getting a high school diploma. But I'm sure that when the decision was made, we were looking at countries where the traditional mediators were, right? These traditional mediators included countries like Nordic countries, Norway and others, but they also included countries in the region. Saudi Arabia has conducted successful mediations in the past. Kuwait was a mediator in they're very successful actually mediator in the 80s, even beyond the region, and there were a lot of lessons to be learned there. And this is why we have now in Qatar the Center for Humanitarian Studies and Conflict Resolution, which is we've contracted the center to document the mediation process. We found out while reviewing our paperwork that we don't have any real documentation of past mediation. So we have a lot of oral history behind it. There are a lot of fragmented documents for that. So we contracted that center to do that, and they are doing that. And now they have a master's program of conflict resolution in Qatar that kind of uses a lot of the things we are doing. We hope, because mediation is made much more easier when you have partners to help you in it. When you go at it alone, it's very difficult. It's very costly. And it's costly to your own reputation also. You end up, because when you mediate between two sides, you antagonize two sides at one point in the mediation.
Or they're all blaming you.
They're all blaming you, exactly. You end up. So if countries would like to share in that blame, please, we are ready to, support that. But of course, we are helpful of any effort to do that. We are working with partners. We pull some partners kicking and screaming into mediation efforts, and we are very hopeful to see a lot of countries, especially those middle powers in the world. Because forget about great powers being good mediators. Okay, they have their own issues. The US is not going to be a great mediator in conflicts in the world, because a lot of these conflicts have to do with, great power rivalry around the world. We, the small, medium countries, have a different position. We can help with that. A lot of times, like between Venezuela and the United States, like we have absolutely no stake in it. We can help mediate. We can be trusted immediately. There's no personal interest. There's no special interest for Qatar in that mediation. When we go between Russia and Ukraine, it's the same thing. We don't have any threat coming from either country, or any benefit gain from either country. So it's that that level of small and medium countries that can play a role, especially the most stable, the most prosperous, that need to pay a dividend for that prosperity. We shouldn't take the prosperity we are living in, the peace we are living in, for granted. If we don't pay dividend to the international community by protecting that peace and prosperity through facilitating peace, and we are basically just, putting our own prosperity at risk.
Yes, sir. And then I'll come back to you, I promise. You too? What time? So we go.
Thank you.
Okay, we have 5 minutes, so please be very brief, okay? So we don't he has a very busy schedule in this.
Dr. Natiri, originally from Tunisia. First of all, I would like to welcome to Washington and thank you and thank Qatar for its role in this area. My question is, do you think the Arab countries are doing what they're supposed to do when it comes to stopping the war and helping the people of Gaza? Thank you.
Let's take the other question as well, please.
To the academic point you made about middle and small nations, Sultan Barakat says something similar. So I'm glad Qatar's kind of found its sweet spot there. And the question was heralding back to something earlier mentioned about the nature of Israeli politics. Bibi Netanyahu was an MIT MBA grad who worked in business with Mitt Romney, built a consulting company, and then went around doing interviews with Palestinian youth and beating them because he was a more formidable speaker, and got a job as UN spokesman for Israel, even though he was here since he was 17. What do you think the specter of Israeli politicians from a persona perspective is going to into the future? Naftali Bennett, Silicon Valley, but obviously both the right-wing nationalist bent in Israeli politics and the demographic shift that's taking place is one that symbolizes a transcendence of the
of the Israeli-US relationship as it has been for the last 7 centuries, Ashkenazi-based now, heralding more Sephardic. And on the other hand, also just where Israeli politics itself sees itself within the Middle East, whether through normalization or through arbitration. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, let's just have him answer these 2 questions and then I'll take the 2 from there and then we conclude.
So I think I need to put my diplomatic hat back again before I answer these 2 questions at the risk of.
You can use SAIS as a home to practice your, to go back to your academic, whenever you want.
The Arab and Muslim Summit in Saudi Arabia set out a program of how the Arab and Muslim countries will deal with this, and the ministerial committee made up of a number of ministers from the Muslim and Arab world has toured a lot of the governments around the world to portray the position of the Arab world. I think regardless of a lot of the Arab issues and animosities and so on that go along, this was a rare moment of unity where everybody sees a real risk in what is happening and everybody is trying to do everything together. So us, for example, the mediation between us, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, we are working together right now very closely, working together to make sure that we align and streamline the efforts that we are doing together, and with coordination with other countries at the same time, like the US and others. So there is very little that can be done, but I think that what is being done right now is very important, and we applaud all of our partners in the region who have risen up to their responsibilities. Bashar al-Assad was he still is a medical doctor who graduated from the UK. I think for us as educators, it's always problematic that a lot of these leaders around the world end up, graduating from Ivy League universities and then, doing whatever they do in politics. And I think there's a disconnect between the intellect and education that they get and the actions on the ground. It says very little for us as educators, but I'm quite sure that we need to separate what they do and the policies they choose from the education they get. The trajectory of politics around the world is very alarming. Just go to a world map and put your finger wherever you want, you'll see a lack of leadership. A lack of leadership that is not alarming because we need strong leaders, strong men in power positions. We don't have, there's a great lack in those who are willing to have the difficult discussions and make the difficult decisions beyond political posturing, beyond looking to the next electoral cycle, beyond photo opportunities. This is happening in the Arab world, it's happening in Asia, it's happening in Africa, it's happening here in the West, it's happening all around. And I'm afraid we are looking at a case now where the central state is becoming useless in dealing with conflict around the world, because those at the, in the power structures in the central states are more focused on social media and getting, traction for the sake of elections than they are with the safety and prosperity of their own people. Now, I'm not saying that this means that we should lose hope in leadership. I mean, in this room, we have about 100 of tomorrow's leaders. You will decide how the next phase of political leadership is going to be. Unless we decide as individuals to change our perspective and to go beyond and to afford to lose when we need to lose favorability and elections and popular support, then we will end up exactly where we are right now. So it's up to us.
But worse, it's going to be far worse. I think the issue of nation state is quite a dominant issue for the next few decades. I think the nation state structure is no longer viable in many ways, given that the foundation has changed, has moved. These institutions also, like the World Bank, where I came from,
the world they were created for in the 1940s is no longer there, and they're just trying to catch up. And it doesn't happen. The foundation's gone. Two questions, you and you. Yes, and then we'll conclude, okay?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm from Pakistan and I'm also a film producer, but my question is related to, as Pakistan has suffered so much to terrorism over the last 20 years, probably one of the highest number of civilian deaths, over 50,000. And a lot of these deaths have been caused by other Muslims. And my question comes from this, that why are the Arab League and the OIC not getting together to condemn any kind of Muslim organization that decides to choose violence as a way to showcase or promote their agenda globally, especially considering that our religion, Islam, is a religion of peace and has always promoted peace. And we are busy for greed and power trying to kill each other in multiple countries. And I'm sorry, I've seen it in my own country. And what can be done on a global level by leaderships from all over the world to condemn this as a way forward? Because that is certainly not the way, and we can see the result of it in the incident of what the Hamas has done. Who's suffering? It's the poor, innocent Palestinian people, the kids. They did what they did. They're a terrorist organization labeled as such, and sure, Qatar is doing a great job of mediating. But when are we going to stop, promoting or, not necessarily promoting, but when are we going to start calling them out as Muslims that this is not the way? Thank you.
Thank you. Last question. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My name is Ben. I'm a master's student here. And I was just wondering, we were talking about earlier how Qatar is an effective moderator, and being an effective moderator entails moderating with sincerity. How do you address, I guess, those who say Qatar isn't, based off of Qatar's hosting of different Hamas leaders, and then also having or supporting Al Jazeera through funding, which people may say doesn't provide necessarily balanced perspectives of this conflict?
Thank you. First of all, please allow me to completely disagree with you, because from an official position, the OIC and the Arab League and the GCC all have announced very clearly their condemnation of violence against civilians in various instances. And most of these organizations have systems and bodies and committees for countering terrorism. And most of the countries in the Muslim world participate in the coalition against ISIS, for example. Qatar is one of these members. And we have, I can tell you, I'm responsible for strategic communication at MOFA. We have a standing procedure whereby any terrorist attack in the world, we immediately issue condemnation even without going through the system. So the system produces condemnation immediately if there is any kind of terrorist attack. But terrorist is not Muslim. Terrorism is not a Muslim phenomenon, right? The problem is that we just say this certain brand of violence we shouldn't accept, but another brand of violence is accepted, right? So state-sanctioned violence, when we like the state, is okay. Civilians dying as a result of an unjust war, when there is kind of justification behind it from the perspective of a number of countries, then it's okay, regardless of the number of people that died. Violence against civilians is violence against civilians. It should be condemned regardless of who does it, under what banner, in what, or even within whatever happens. Right? War is war. War is terrible, but targeting civilians purposefully cannot be accepted in any manner. And I think while there is a lot to be done in promoting the need for de-radicalization, terrorism is a symptom. It's not the illness. The illness is despair, it's hopelessness, it's people living in conditions that are appalling all around the world. And it produces hatred, it produces radicalization, produces terrorism. So we need to find the root causes before we start this firefighting and playing whack-a-mole around the world trying to end all these conflicts. I mean, I have a direct answer to this, but I'll try to expand on it a little bit. Are the leaders of Hamas who are in the political office in Doha, did they come and hide in Qatar without the US, the Israeli government, the whole of the world knowing that? Of course not. They've been there physically since 2012, as a communication channel since 2006, mandated by the United States government in an attempt to open a channel for communication. So I can't accept the allegation that because you host them, then you support them. We hosted the Taliban in Qatar, the political office of the Taliban, during the negotiation with the United States. We were then also attacked and said we were harboring the Taliban. We're not harboring the Taliban when the United States government sends its envoys to Qatar to meet with the Taliban. And the same thing is going right now with Hamas. And we are hosting 12,000 servicemen and women of the United States in Qatar. So obviously the United States government felt that this is a terror supporting country. They wouldn't have put CENTCOM in Qatar. Regarding Al Jazeera, in my office I have a TV and I flip between CNN and Al Jazeera, right? And whenever I have a couple of moments, I go to CNN, see 5 minutes, and go to Al Jazeera, see 5 minutes. If you go to Al Jazeera, there is 24/7 coverage on Gaza. If you go to CNN, when there is coverage on Gaza, the footage is from Tel Aviv. Very rarely will you see any footage about the human suffering in Gaza. Is the government of the United States, supporting the killing of civilians in Gaza? Of course not. But media is media. The only reason Al Jazeera is successful from a viewership perspective is because it talks to its space, like Fox News talks to its space, right? Like CNN talks to its space. If there was a school shooting in the US and I was flipping between Fox and CNN, would I get the same narrative? Obviously not. I'll get a completely different story, right? On the reasons, on the story itself, the footage, the reporting, everything will change. I was talking, to a director of Al Jazeera. Of course, coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the biggest headache for us is Al Jazeera and Discovery. So I'm talking to him and saying, "Why are you doing this?" And he, brings out his phone and he said, "Let me show you something." And he shows me the number of people watching online on Al Jazeera, and it was at the time 55,000. And then he goes to all the Arab competitors, the Arab channels, including Qatari channels, and the highest amongst them was 4,000. So it's a media channel they're looking for. The only way it succeeded as a channel was that the government put a China wall between us and Al Jazeera. So while we'd like to have more influence over their coverage, they can do whatever that. But the thing is, I always encourage, and I was talking to a couple of ambassadors who were criticizing the coverage of Al Jazeera. I told them this: I'll pick up the phone now, I'll get you appointments with the director of Al Jazeera, the editor-in-chief of their program, and you go there and you sit down with them and you talk to them, and they went and they talked to them and they suggested guests, and the next day these guests were on Al Jazeera. It's a media channel, they like it. And you'll see, Al Jazeera was criticized for so many years in the Arab world because it brought Israelis into Arab living rooms. You had Avichai Hadrawi, who was the speaker for the IDF, speaking regularly today on Al Jazeera. You have Zionist leaders, not only Israelis, thought leaders, intellectuals speaking on Al Jazeera. You had at one point Israeli minister speaking on Al Jazeera. It's a platform. My suggestion would be engage with it, affect it through being there. Disengaging from it will only, and this is why I think, because there was talk in the Israeli government about shutting down Al Jazeera's offices in Israel, it didn't happen. Because I think even the Israeli government understands the importance of Al Jazeera's coverage from inside Israel, not disengage completely.
I can agree. I mean, I watch Al Jazeera because it brings both perspectives, in my opinion. I remember when I was in the World Bank for many years, practically every desk over there, when you see what they're watching, it is Al Jazeera English. So I'm a big supporter of Al Jazeera. I appear on it many times, and I think, like Dr. Majed said, I've met with their directors, I met with a lot of their producers. It is really a very open organization that you can influence. You can lobby and make them change their narratives about stories. I write for them freely. They never told me to write something in their opinion section of any kind. No pressure of this. Anyway, Dr. Majed, I'm very grateful to you. Thank you very much for being here. It is a great opportunity for our students, which is actually the mission of SAIS, is to have an academic and also a practitioner. I mean, that's the whole point of SAIS, of the Foreign Policy Institute, is how do we marry academic research, academic narratives with actual practical knowledge. So you are an ideal person to come and speak here to our students. That's what we like. I'm very grateful to all of you for being here. Thank you. And we at the Foreign Policy Institute, we plan to do multiple events like these. The reason why I do the Middle East and North Africa is that's all I know. That's my life has been on the Middle East and North Africa. So I try very hard to bring these voices. We had Sheikh Mohammed, the Prime Minister, speak here a couple of years ago. It was COVID, so he engaged with us from his office in Doha. We had the Prime Minister of Libya during the war in Libya was here as well. So I try to bring all of these complex issues. So thank you very much. Thank you to our staff and who did an incredible job to make this happen. Thank you, Cinnamon, for being here, our great director and supporter. The event will be online, so you can watch it. I think it's also going to be on the SAIS page, right, or the Foreign Policy Institute page. So please, watch it if you missed something. And I say this also to the audience outside. Thank you. Glad to that we got you well.